My name is Judith, and I never expected the hardest part of getting older would be the silence. Not just the kind you hear when the TV is off, or when no one's knocking at your door. I'm talking about the kind of silence that settles deep in your bones when the people who once filled your life stop needing you. After my husband passed, the house felt too big, too quiet. I kept the living room just the way he liked it, with his favourite chair by the window and the old lamp that always flickered but never quite gave out. Some days, I'd sit there for hours, pretending I could still hear his footsteps in the hallway. I tried to keep busy. I'd water the plants, rearrange the same kitchen drawers, and reread the same book 3 times. I told myself I was fine, that I was strong, that this was just what life looked like now. But the truth is, loneliness doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers through the ticking of the clock and the echo of your own voice. Then one afternoon, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. Calls were rare these days, and when they did come, it was usually a wrong number or a neighbour checking in out of obligation. But when I picked it up and heard Mark's voice, something stirred in me that I hadn't felt in a long time. He sounded soft, almost hesitant. He asked how I was doing, and I gave him the usual answer, fine, just fine. I didn't tell him I hadn't spoken to anyone all week, or that I'd cried that morning over a coffee cup that used to be his father's. Mark said he and Melissa had been talking, and they thought maybe I should come stay with them for a while. Said the kids missed me. Said there was space. Said it would be good for all of us. My first instinct was to laugh, not out of joy, but surprise. I didn't know what to say. It wasn't that I didn't want to be closer to them. I did. But something about the way he said it, like it was a suggestion more for their benefit than mine, made me pause. Still, the idea of hearing the laughter of my grandkids, of being part of something again, felt like someone cracking a window open after a long winter. So I said I'd think about it. And I did. For days, I wandered my house, touching the doorknobs he used to turn the blanket we once shared the photo frames, gathering dust. And I wondered if maybe, just maybe, being needed again would feel like coming home. I had no idea that accepting his offer would be the beginning of losing myself. I packed light. Just 2 suitcases, one with clothes and the other with a few keepsakes I couldn't bear to leave behind. As I locked my front door, I stood there for a moment longer than I needed to, staring at the porch like I was trying to memorize it. The drive wasn't long, just over an hour, but each mile felt like I was leaving more of myself behind. I imagined the kids waiting at the window, maybe Melissa holding a welcome sign, or Mark stepping outside before I even turned the engine off. But no one was outside when I pulled up. The yard was scattered with plastic toys and an overfilled garbage can tipped halfway into the driveway. I sat in the car for a beat, my fingers wrapped tight around the steering wheel, then forced a breath and got out. I knocked twice. It took a moment before the door opened, and there was Melissa. She didn't smile. Her face was blank. Her eyes flicked past me like I was a neighbour asking to borrow a rake. "You're early," she said, stepping aside without another word. Mark appeared at the top of the stairs with their toddler on his hip. He gave me a quick hug, short and distracted, the kind you give when your mind is somewhere else. The baby squirmed in his arms, uninterested, and the older boy didn't even look up from the tablet in his hands. They showed me to the guest room. At least that's what they called it. It was more of a storage space with an air mattress pushed against the far wall. Boxes lined the floor, and there was a broken lamp in the corner that hadn't been plugged in. No dresser, no closet space. I'd have to live out of my suitcase. It's not perfect, but it's something Mark said. I smiled politely. "It'll do," I murmured, trying to sound grateful. But deep down, I felt it already, that low, hollow hum of displacement, like I was being slotted into a space no one really planned for. Dinner was takeout, eaten on paper plates, with the TV blaring in the background. Melissa scrolled through her phone the entire time. Mark tried to make conversation, but every time he asked me something, he seemed to forget he had. The kids bickered and left the table halfway through. No one noticed when I cleaned up. That night, I lay on the air mattress, listening to the hum of a dishwasher and muffled arguments behind closed doors. The mattress sagged in the middle, and my back ached within minutes. I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I'd made a mistake. The days that followed blurred into each other. I offered to cook, but Melissa had her own way. I offered to watch the boys, but she barely responded. When I folded laundry or did dishes, she'd redo them or sigh just loud enough for me to hear. Every interaction with her was coated in something sticky and polite. Not kindness, just the sort of civility you extend to someone you didn't invite but are too tired to ask to leave. She never looked me in the eye for long. When she did, there was a wall I couldn't get through. Mark worked late. He'd come home, kiss the boys, then retreat to his office. I asked if everything was okay once. He just said they were busy. Bill's kids stressed the usual. I nodded. I'd been through tougher with less, but I didn't remind him of that. One morning, I tried to surprise them with breakfast. Eggs, pancakes, even fresh orange juice. Melissa walked in halfway through and said she had already ordered smoothies. She barely looked at the table. Mark thanked me distractedly, then rushed out to drive the kids to school. When I cleaned the living room that afternoon, I found receipts tucked into the couch cushions, boutique clothing, a high-end candle store, and a meal at a sushi bar. All while Mark said they were struggling with bills. I didn't ask. I told myself it wasn't my place. The next evening, I brought home groceries, hoping to ease the burden. Melissa raised an eyebrow at the receipt and asked if I remembered to scan their rewards card. The tone in her voice wasn't one of gratitude. It was management. That night, I lay on the same mattress and stared at the same ceiling, but this time with a lump in my throat. I had imagined this so differently. A family table, laughter, a place where I was needed, not just tolerated. I wasn't their guest. I wasn't their elder. I was a shadow in their hallway, someone to smile at in passing, someone to thank with half-closed eyes, someone whose presence was more convenient than welcomed. But I told myself it was temporary. I held on to that word like it meant something. Temporary. I just hadn't realized how long temporary could feel when no one wants you there. Every morning I woke up before anyone else. I'd start the coffee, unload the dishwasher, and sweep the crumbs off the kitchen floor. It wasn't much, but it made me feel useful, like I still had something to offer. I folded laundry that wasn't mine, matched tiny socks, picked up toys from corners that no one seemed to notice. I didn't expect a thank you. I just wanted to help. But the silence that followed every gesture slowly chipped away at my sense of purpose. One afternoon, I ran a single load of towels while Melissa was out. Later that day, she passed me in the hallway and said without looking, "Could you not use the washer during the day? The electric bill's been high." I blinked. I opened my mouth to respond, but she was already halfway down the stairs. Another time, she sighed loudly when I forgot to turn off the bathroom light. It was barely noon sun streaming through the windows, but you'd think I'd left the stove on overnight. I apologized. She didn't answer. Mark, when I mentioned it, gave a half-hearted shrug, said they were under pressure. Melissa gets tense when things pile up. I nodded. I remembered that kind of pressure. I'd lived it. But I also remembered how a little grace made it bearable. Even the meals I made drew subtle corrections. One night, I prepared chicken stir-fry with vegetables that the boys liked. Melissa pushed the plate aside and said she was avoiding carbs. Mark ate in silence. The kids barely touched it. The next morning, she tossed the leftovers in the trash. I bought groceries with my own money, stocked their fridge, and made sure there was always fruit for the boys' lunches. Melissa glanced at the bags, then said, "We don't usually buy that brand." I nodded, feeling the heat rise in my chest, but saying nothing. One evening, I swept the hallway and moved a pair of shoes left in the middle of the floor. Later, I heard her on the phone telling someone, "She's always rearranging things. Like this is her house." I stood frozen in the kitchen, listening to her voice float through the vents. The coldness wasn't loud. It was measured, passive, layered in polite tones and half smiles. But it cut deeper than yelling ever could. It made me question every move I made. Mark never said anything unkind, but he never stepped in either. When I told him I felt like maybe I was in the way, he said, "You're doing great, Mom." But his eyes were already on his phone. I started to second-guess everything. Was I helping too much? Was I not helping enough? I felt like an intern in someone else's life, always trying to prove my worth without knowing the rules. Each day blurred into the next, not with drama, but with tiny hurts that no one seemed to notice except me. It came up over dinner casually, like someone mentioning the weather. Mark said things had been tight lately. Bills piling up, mortgage payments creeping higher just until they got back on their feet. I didn't hesitate. Of course, I said. I dipped into my savings that same week and covered half the payment. I told myself it was just one time. Families help each other. But the next month, he asked again. This time it was during a rushed morning coffee in one hand, laptop in the other. He looked tired, and I didn't want to add to his stress. So I said yes. By the third month, there wasn't even a question. Just a mention that the mortgage had cleared and a quiet thanks with no eye contact. It had shifted from a gesture of support to something expected, like a subscription I never signed up for. I wanted to believe I was doing the right thing, that I was easing their burden, but then I started noticing things. Melissa came home with new handbags. The kids wore matching outfits that still had tags. There was a delivery from a high-end furniture store sitting in the garage. Meanwhile, Mark still said they were stretched thin. He'd rub his temples, mutter about interest rates, and sigh into his coffee like the world was closing in. But he never mentioned cutting back, just seemed to hope the next month would fix itself. When I offered to help budget or find ways to save, Melissa smiled tightly and said they had it handled. Her tone wasn't grateful. It was dismissive, like I was overstepping. I stopped feeling like a helper. I started feeling like a lifeline. They had no intention of letting go. And the more I gave, the less I felt seen. Not just in their eyes, but in how they treated me. Like I was useful, not valuable. There was no discussion, no plan, just the quiet assumption that I would keep showing up, keep covering the gaps. The kindness I offered was being absorbed without acknowledgement, like water into dry soil. No thank yous, no conversations, just more silence. I started to wonder if they had invited me for my company or for my wallet. I hated thinking that way. It made me feel petty suspicious. But something in my chest told me I wasn't wrong. The house still ran on its routine. Melissa still scrolled through her phone. Mark still disappeared into his office, and I still stood in the middle of it all wondering when I became the one paying to feel invisible. Dinner that night was quiet at first. I had made a casserole, the kind that stretched for days, and filled the house with a warmth we hadn't felt in weeks. I set the table like always, folded the napkins the way I used to when Mark was little, trying to make it feel like home again. The kids were restless, picking at their food and sliding their forks around the plate. Mark sat with his laptop open beside him, scrolling through emails between bites. Melissa was across from me, phone in one hand, fork in the other, barely present. I tried once again to start a conversation. I said gently, "You know, if we all sat together more often for meals, maybe the boys would eat better." My voice was soft, not accusing, just a suggestion meant to bridge the distance. Melissa didn't look up. Mark cleared his throat like he was bracing for something. Then Melissa set her fork down with a loud clink and lifted her eyes to meet mine for the first time that night. "You're always making little comments, Judith, like we don't know how to run our own house." Her voice was flat but sharp underneath, like a knife slid slowly across the table. I blinked, surprised. I hadn't meant anything by it. I started to explain. But she cut me off, her tone colder now. "You do a lot of talking for someone who doesn't actually contribute enough to be making suggestions." The words landed like a slap. The room went still. Mark didn't say anything. He didn't defend me. He didn't even lift his eyes from his plate. I felt the air leave my lungs. My hands trembled beneath the table. I opened my mouth again, but no sound came out. Because in that moment, I understood something I had been trying not to see. I wasn't family. I was a burden, a placeholder, a warm body to fill a gap in their schedule, someone to pick up the slack, to cover the bills, to fold the clothes. But not someone worth listening to, not someone whose opinion mattered. I looked at Melissa, at her perfect hair, her dismissive glance already drifting back to her phone. I looked at Mark, my son, the boy I had fed and held and sacrificed for, and I didn't recognize him. He just sat there letting her speak to me like I was nobody. I didn't finish my dinner. I didn't say another word. I carried my plate to the sink, rinsed it quietly, and walked down the hall to my room. My breath was tight in my chest. My legs moved like they didn't belong to me. Inside the guest room, I sat on the edge of the air mattress. My fingers rested on the zipper of my suitcase, like they knew something before I did. My eyes were dry, but inside I felt something collapse. I thought about all the times I gave without question. The birthdays I paid for the grocery bills. I covered the nights I stayed up with crying babies so they could sleep. And now I didn't contribute enough. I stared at the wall at the stack of boxes that they never moved to make room for me. I had told myself this was temporary, that I was needed, that love meant being there even when it was hard. But love, I realized, isn't silence in the face of disrespect. It isn't pretending not to notice when someone decides you're worth less than they once believed. Love is action. Love is a voice. And no one in that room had spoken for me. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the sound of the house, not just the creaks and clicks of settling wood, but the deeper sounds, the kind that comes when you finally hear how someone really sees you. And I knew without a doubt that something inside me had changed. I woke before the sun. The house was still that strange kind of silence that only happens before dawn, when even the walls seem to breathe slowly. I sat on the edge of the air mattress, my suitcase already zipped, waiting by the door, like it had known before I did. I didn't bother with breakfast. I didn't leave a note filled with explanations. Just one line written in the cursive I was taught in Catholic school. Thank you for having me. I placed it on the kitchen counter beside the coffee pot and glanced once around the room. The sink was empty. The floor was clean. I had made sure of that the night before. Some part of me needed to leave it better than I found it. No one stirred as I walked out the front door. No Mark peeking down the stairs. No Melissa in the hallway. Not even the kids. The world outside was quiet and grey, the air crisp, the sky still undecided between night and day. As I pulled out of their driveway, my hands shook on the wheel. Not with fear, but with finality. The farther I drove, the clearer I felt, like something heavy was lifting off my chest inch by inch with every mile that took me back to my own front door. When I pulled into my driveway, the house looked smaller than I remembered. The paint is a little duller, the windows dustier, but it was mine, every inch of it. No one else's rules. No one else's silence pretending to be kindness. I stepped inside and was hit with the smell of stillness. Old wood. Closed rooms. Time. I walked through the hallway, touching the wall. The picture frames, the chipped corner of the table where Harold used to rest his coffee. My slippers were still where I left them. The curtains were still drawn the way I liked. I stood in the kitchen, the light just beginning to spill through the window. And for a moment, I let myself cry. Not from regret, but from the ache of realizing how much I had abandoned myself in trying to belong. I sat down at the table and opened my laptop, logged into my banking app, scrolled to the automatic transfers. They were all there. Neat, regular, dependable. Each one a quiet erosion I had allowed month after month. I hovered over the first one. My finger trembled, then clicked cancel. Then another. Cancel. One by one I deleted them. Mortgage, utilities, grocery reimbursements. Every single one. Click. Cancel. Done. When the last one disappeared, I sat still. The silence around me wasn't hollow anymore. It was full. It was mine. I had given enough. Given past the point of being seen. And now I had taken the first step in giving something back to myself. The house was cold, but it was honest. The room was empty, but not unkind. And as I sat there alone, but not invisible, I realized I hadn't lost everything. I had just found the part of me that said no more. It started with a strange feeling, a tightness in my chest that came out of nowhere one night as I was folding laundry in the quiet. I hadn't thought much about the money since I cancelled the transfers, but something told me to double-check. I logged into my bank account. At first, everything looked normal. No withdrawals, no surprises. But as I clicked through the statements, one old notification caught my eye. An email from 2 months back that I hadn't opened, buried under moving updates and spam. The subject line read, "Large withdrawal alert." My heart stuttered. I clicked it open and saw an amount that made my stomach drop. Hundreds of dollars. Transferred to a name I didn't recognize. I went deeper, pulling up previous months. There were more. Same strange name. Different amounts. All large, all regular. All during the time I was living under that roof, thinking I was helping pay the mortgage. I copied the company name and pasted it into Google. The search result hit me like a wave I couldn't stand against. An online gambling site. I stared at the screen, the letters blurring through the hot sting behind my eyes. It wasn't just that he'd used my money for something other than what he said. It was that he'd looked me in the face, thanked me, let me cook his meals, clean his house, watch his kids, while feeding an addiction he didn't even try to hide well. I felt something crack open in my chest. A cold, hollow space where trust used to live. He hadn't asked. He hadn't warned me. He had just taken. Again and again. Like it was owed. Like I wouldn't notice. I thought of all those quiet dinners, all the times I sat there feeling invisible. And now I knew it wasn't just indifference. It was manipulation. It was theft dressed as gratitude. I didn't cry right away. I sat still. Let the shame rise and settle. Not my shame. His. But I'd worn it like mine for too long. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat at the table, the blue light of the screen flickering against the dark window. I thought of the boy I once rocked to sleep, the man I thought still had goodness buried under the mess. But that night I stopped hoping. I stopped making excuses. And in the quiet hum of my kitchen, I made a promise to myself. I will not give anything else to someone who doesn't value the cost. Not time, not money, not love. Not one more ounce of me. He showed up unannounced. I saw the car pull into my driveway from the kitchen window, that same sedan I knew too well by now. My heart didn't race. It just settled heavy and still, like it had been waiting for this moment. Mark stepped out, shoulders slumped, hands jammed deep into his jacket pockets. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not just thinner, but diminished somehow, like the weight of his choices had finally started pressing down. I opened the door before he could knock. He looked up, startled by my presence, like he'd been rehearsing what he'd say on the porch. His voice cracked a little. "Mum, I need to talk to you, just for a minute." I didn't answer right away. I just stepped aside and let him in. He walked slowly, like he wasn't sure if the floor beneath him would hold. We sat in the living room. He didn't ask how I was, didn't comment on the house, just sat there wringing his hands, staring at the ground, then finally said, "I know things were bad. I know I messed up. But we're in trouble. The house, the bills. Melissa's losing it. I thought maybe just this once you could help." I looked at him. Really looked. This was my child, the boy I had once carried through fevers, taught how to ride a bike, and held through heartbreak. But this man, sitting across from me, wasn't that boy. He was someone who had taken and taken until I was dry inside. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just said 2 words. "Not today." He blinked, confused, like the meaning didn't register. I said it again, gently. "Not today, Mark." He opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to beg, but I raised my hand not to silence him, but to end the moment. "You let her speak to me like I didn't matter. You used me like I was a credit card you didn't have to pay back. And now you want help." He dropped his head. "I'm sorry, Mum. I really am. I believe you." I said it with a calm he didn't expect. But believing you doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It doesn't mean giving again when I've got nothing left to give. He stood slowly. Didn't fight. Didn't slam the door. Just walked to the car like a man learning how to carry his own weight. I watched him go, then closed the door behind him. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the one left behind. I felt like the one in control. He came back 3 weeks later. This time he didn't look desperate. He looked tired, but clear-eyed. There was something different in the way he stood on my porch, like he had finally started facing himself instead of just his problems. When I opened the door, he didn't speak right away. He held a folder in one hand, creased at the edges, and in the other, a small piece of paper folded into quarters. His voice was quiet. I'm getting help. I've started going to meetings. I sold the SUV. I'm trying Mum. I let him in. We sat at the same kitchen table we'd shared so many quiet breakfasts long ago. He admitted he had a problem, said it out loud without flinching. For the first time, he didn't follow it with a request for forgiveness. He just told the truth. When he finally asked if I could help one last time, I didn't answer right away. I got up, went to my drawer, and pulled out a folder of my own. Inside was a printed payment plan, a budget breakdown, a list of vetted treatment centers, a checklist titled Boundaries. He looked at me confused at first, then opened it. His eyes moved over the pages slowly. No reaction, no resistance, just silence. I told him I would pay the amount needed to bring the mortgage current. One time. That was it. He nodded, eyes welling. I didn't say I'd keep paying. I didn't offer more. I told him the money would come after he followed the steps. Not just once, but consistently. Weekly check-ins, financial transparency, separate accounts from Melissa. Complete honesty. He looked down at the final page where I had typed, "This is not a rescue. This is a contract." He didn't argue. He signed it with shaky hands and a quiet thank you. As he stood to leave, he looked at me like he hadn't in years, not as someone who owed him something, but as someone who had drawn a line and held it. I watched him walk away with the folder in hand and knew this wasn't the end. But it was the beginning of something real, something earned, something with boundaries. The first thing I did was open the windows. Let the air move through the house, stirring up dust, and something else I hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. I rearranged the living room, not for guests, but for me, moved my favorite chair closer to the window where the sun hit just right in the mornings. I found an old notebook in the drawer and started writing. Nothing fancy, just a page each day, whatever came to mind. Some days were quiet, some days were angry, but every word felt like a small piece of myself returning home. I signed up for an online course in watercolor painting. It had been years, but my hands remembered how to move the brush. I started posting photos of my work, and someone messaged to ask if I sold them. That's how the Etsy shop began. One print, then another. I named it Second Light, because that's what this felt like. Not a return to who I was before, but a second beginning. Different, smaller, but brighter in all the right places. I still think about Mark. I still love him. But now that love has boundaries, I send the boys little packages once a month. A book. A snack I know they like. A note tucked inside with a simple line. I'm here, but not the same way I used to be. Mornings are my favorite now. I make my coffee slowly sit on the porch and let the silence be something I choose, not something that was forced on me. The quiet no longer feels like loneliness. It feels like peace. The guilt is mostly gone. Not entirely. But I can breathe through it now. I can look at myself in the mirror and not see someone who failed. I see someone who learned, who stood back who decided her worth wasn't tied to how much she gave or how silent she stayed. I started saving again. Not for anyone else. For me. For trips I might take. For a chair I saw in a catalogue that looked absurdly comfortable. For the simple joy of knowing I can. Last week I bought myself a necklace. Nothing flashy. Just a silver pendant with one word engraved on the back. Whole. And that's what I am. not broken, not lost, not used up, whole, and finally, finally mine.